everyone. Welcome to the Portfolio.
New York City is known for its majestic Broadway musical theaters, but there are over 100 off-Broadway theaters as well, where young, emerging playwrights and directors can showcase their experimental and thought-provoking plays.
There aren't very many Korean American playwrights in the New York theater scene. However, there is one brilliant and fearless Korean American woman who has gained quite a reputation as one of the best experimental playwrights in America.
Ladies and gentlemen, let's meet today's guest, an Obie Award-winning playwright and director, Ms. Young Jin Lee.
Welcome, Young-jin.
Thanks for coming on our show.
Yeah,
thank you for having me.
We're delighted to have you here. We decided to have a change of pace because you are an experimental playwright. And so we are filming today at Pocha 32. What do you think about the place?
It's really fun.
A lot of fun happens here, especially at night.
I can imagine if there are Koreans involved.
Sure, and then drinking,
Yes.
exactly. Well, let's get right into the interview. You were born in Daegu, South Korea in 1974 and came to the United States at the age of 2.
Yes.
Why did your family move here?
My father was going to graduate school here to study chemical engineering, so that's why we moved.
Sojung's family is actually from Daegu as well.
Oh.
Yes, yeah, we're Daegu sisters.
And then you ended up at Pullman, Washington.
Yes.
And at some point you wrote a play titled Pullman, Washington. What was that play about? Was it about your childhood?
It was not. I mean, my growing up in Eastern Washington State, there were very few other Asian American kids, or Asian American people. So it was very, very white, and I grew up like really lonely, and so I didn't really have a great time in Pullman. So the show that I made called Pullman Wa was about unhappiness, and so that's why I named it after my hometown.
Let's talk about your family and your parents. What can you describe them for us?
My father, my father he died recently, a few years ago. He was a chemical engineering professor at Washington State University, and that's how we ended up in Pullman, Washington. And my mother was a homemaker, and they were both very devout Christians, which is probably surprising to you. You probably don't know any Korean Christians.
A few.
Just a few. So so they were very religious, and they were very kind of unconventional for Korean parents. They never pushed me, to do well in school or to, they were very open. I know that when they were in college, they were like sort of the Bible study leader, sort of cool, more liberal types, so when I was growing up, they were very open. They would talk to me about anything, and it was very there was no distance between us.
And were you an only child?
I was an only child. Yeah.
Oh, well, it's nice. I mean, that's refreshing to hear that there really wasn't sort of this cultural gap or generational difficulty.
Well, there definitely was a cultural gap and generational difficulty, but in terms of just actually like getting along, like they still, they were very conservative and very strict, and so we fought in that aspect. But we really had great communication.
Oh, wonderful.
And did they have a difficult time as well adjusting to Pullman, Washington, or is that more just your experience?
Yeah, I think they did. My mother in particular. I mean, they were so used to growing up in Seoul and
Sure.
the city, and I think it was a little bit lonely for them. But there were always Asian American, Korean American faculty in the science department and stuff. So they had, they had people other Koreans to socialize with.
When was this from?
I don't. This was their wedding. My grandfather and my grandmother on my father's side. Their wedding photo.
1800s maybe, right? Wow.
It's really beautiful. Well, tell us about your family. Where does your creativity come from?
Well, my grandfather on my mother's side was sort of a well-known Korean intellectual. His name was Son Jin-tae, and he was a collector of Korea's folk tradition. So he went all around the country. He was the first folk historian in Korea, and he was like the vice minister of education. And he was just like a really great academic. He wrote a lot of books. And during the war, the North Koreans just kidnapped him when my mother was 5, and the family just never saw him again. And there's been a book written. So the North Koreans just rounded up a bunch of artists and intellectuals and just took them to North Korea to, I don't know, to do things for North Korea. And so we have no idea what happened to him. But everybody, all of the cousins and the kids, all of my mother's sisters, and all of the cousins are so creative. They're all, they all studied the humanities, and like very, very artsy side of the family.
But how did you know that you were very talented at it? I mean, was there a moment that sort of validated your gift as a writer?
English teachers had always been very encouraging about my creative writing, but when I moved to New York, I didn't know if I had talent or not at that point. It was very, I was so unhappy in grad school, and I went to see a therapist. And the therapist said, I'm going to ask you a question, and I just want you to answer it off the top of your head. Like, don't even think about the answer. And she said, what do you want to do with your life? And I said, I want to be a playwright. And the idea had never even occurred to me before. And so I was really embarrassed. And I said, oh, that was a mistake. Can I try again? And she said, well, you said that, so let's explore it. And it turned out that the only reason I was studying Shakespeare was because I secretly wanted to be a playwright.
So here you are, you're doing a PhD course at Berkeley. Your parents are, I'm sure, very proud of the external, what you're going through at that time. And then you say, hey, I'm moving to New York. I'm going to go to Brooklyn College and do my MFA, right? Mm-hmm. So what was their reaction to that?
They were heartbroken. They were heartbroken, because just think 10 years devoted to studying Shakespeare and all of this, money, and it's every parent's nightmare. You devote that much sort of like money and care and time to your child's education, and then they drop out and they leave to do something crazy. It was like a double heartbreak for them because I was married to somebody who was going to Yale Law School, and I was working on my dissertation, and so they thought everything was fine, and I ended up getting a divorce and dropping out of grad school. So in a matter of a few years, just all of their hopes for me were of security for me were just dashed. So and I was very impressed by them. I mean, they were, I feel like people don't give Korean parents enough credit. They think that any bad news like that is just going to kill them and they'll never recover. But they actually, there's nothing they can do.
I think parents realize.
Yeah, and I think your parents' generation, my parents' generation, they've survived 2 wars and they've immigrated to another country where English and cultural barriers, and they've survived that. So people, I don't think, give them enough credit for resiliency.
Yeah. Maybe that's their strategy. They try to make it seem like they'll just have a heart attack and die if you defy them, but actually they're really tough.
Well, while you were doing your master's program, you wrote a play there. It was an assignment titled The Appeal.
Yes.
And how did that play define the way that you work?
Well, when I first started trying to write a play, I was having so much trouble because I wanted to write something so amazing. And if you sit down as an artist and you think in your head, I want to write something really amazing, that's the worst possible way to try to start a work of art. And so So I was having a lot of trouble, and I called up my professor at Brooklyn College, Mac Wellman, and I said, I'm really stuck. I can't write a play. I don't know what to do. And I said, and he said, well, what's the problem? And I said, everything I write is so bad. And he said, well, if everything you write is so bad, then just really go all the way and write the worst thing you could possibly think of. And I was like, well, you're not going to fail me? And he's like, no, just as long as it's bad enough. Like that'll be great. And so I sat down and I just tried to write the absolute worst play I could possibly think of. And when I was in graduate school, I studied the English Romantic poets, like Wordsworth and Coleridge, and with the ruffly shirts and the, and I did not like them at all. Like I thought their poetry was really, I don't know, just. They were just very much not to my taste. And so I thought the worst thing that I could think of to write would be a historical play about the English Romantic poets sitting around talking about life and art. I just thought that sounded so pretentious and boring. And so that was the play that I wrote. And as I was writing, I would get bored and irritated with the characters, so I would do really sadistic things to them. And it was kind of like, when somebody's playing with like Barbie dolls, and then they stick the Barbie doll's head in the toilet and then throw the other one out the window. And it was kind of, yeah, I think everybody did. But so we, it was like, in the play I was doing that with the characters, and so it ended up being funny.
Well, now let's talk about your other play, Songs of the Dragons Flying in Heaven. What a great title. I mean, how did you come up with a name like that?
Well, it's the English translation of Yongbi Ochanga. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right. Is that right? Yongbi Ochanga. And it's the first epic poem ever written in Hangul, the Korean script. And I remember just thinking that title just sounded so Asian. Like I couldn't imagine anything that sounded more Asian. And I was really, and I was getting really irritated that all Asian American art had to have a flowery sounding Asian title, and with the Chinese restaurant lettering and the flowery stuff. So it was just like everybody had to do that, and I was getting annoyed. So I just chose the most flowery sounding Asian title I could think of, and then made a play that was sort of the opposite of that.
Have you ever noticed how most Asian Americans are slightly brain damaged from having grown up with Asian parents? It's like being raised by monkeys. These retarded monkeys who can barely speak English and who are too evil to understand anything besides conformity and status.
Well, a lot of people feel very uncomfortable sort of making fun of their own culture, and in this play you refer to Koreans as monkeys. Now, why monkeys, and how did the Korean American community react to your work?
It was so funny. Like I expected more Asian Americans to be offended, and they weren't offended at all. Like the people, I think it's also like the people who would end up at my play are the type of people who wouldn't be offended. But all of the Asians and the Asian Americans I talked to thought it was really funny, because it wasn't, it was basically showing how, how Asian American teenagers are sort of, or young people sort of grow up and they internalize this sort of self-hatred, and they don't want to be like other Asians. And they want to separate themselves, and and they'll talk about other Asian people in very offensive ways, and sort of say, I don't want to be like that. And so it was kind of a commentary on that.
Well, your work deals a lot with race, and you had a play titled The Shipment, which has been called the Black, politics, it's called the Black Identity Politics Show. And in that you sort of challenge people's preconceived notions about race and culture. How did the African American community react to your play?
Very, with a lot of openness, and I think the reason for that was because I basically, all of the, even though I did all the writing, all of the feelings and emotions and thoughts and opinions came from my actors who were all Black. So it wasn't like an Asian American person's take on Black identity. It was all coming from the performers, and then I was just making a show, for them to be in that sort of expressed their feelings and their concerns. So I think Black audience members very much, felt that.
Something to drink. I have gin and tonic, rum and coke, wine, beer. I can make a martini.
I'm all right. I've been trying not to drink so much lately.
Really? Me too.
No way.
Yeah.
Isn't it amazing how much better you feel?
It's great.
I'm even considering going to AA. All my friends go and they love it. We should go together.
What's your schedule look like next week? What is wrong with everyone?
Well, The Shipment was a huge hit. I mean,
Right.
congratulations.
Yeah.
That actually toured to the Sydney Opera House, and there was an HD video at BAM. So congratulations on that success. How was that for you?
It's great. I mean, it's so sad because it's like, you take it for granted so quickly. So I try to remind myself, that I'm really lucky that all of this is happening.
And so now let's talk about another one of your shows, the Untitled Feminist Show. It features 6 white naked females. And it's been described as fearless, striking, and adventurous by the New York Times. It's been a huge hit at Performance Space 122 in New York. And you mentioned it's on tour now. It's on international tour.
Yes.
And how's that being received across the world?
It's been going really well. I mean, I feel like most of my shows, all of my shows have a very divided reaction, so some audience members really love it and some audience members really hate it. And so this show is like very controversial, I think, in that way.
Well, when you were preparing for it, tell us about that process.
There's a lot of talking that happens in my shows to sort of build up a feeling of trust and so that everybody sort of knows why they're doing it. In the beginning, there was text. So in the final show, there was no talking. It was just movement and dance and mime and music. I was doing a co-production with a company called 13P, and they told me, we really want you to do the craziest possible thing you can think of. And most of my ideas had been pretty crazy, so I was like, well, what could be crazier? And I realized that the one safety net that all of my shows had was that they all had really wonderful performers. And I thought, what would it be like if I had to make a show with bad performers? And so I thought about it, and then I thought, oh, well, that's not really ethical, because imagine how you would feel being cast as one of the performers and then find out you got cast because you're bad. So I was like, okay, I can't do that. And then I thought, oh, I'm a bad performer. So I could perform it. And I was like, that is really crazy because I hate performing. And so I thought, okay, well, what is the worst form of performance I could imagine doing? And I thought a one-person cabaret show with singing and dancing. For a non-performer, for somebody who hates that, that's like the worst thing you can imagine.
And also just involving autobiographical elements to that as well, just telling your life story.
Yeah, and it ended up not being my life story. I mean, there's the story in there about my father, which is true, but all of the stories ended up being true, but not necessarily my stories because I wanted to be universal. And the show ended up being, my father had died the year before, and I just wanted to make a show that would comfort people who felt, in pain and lonely. And so that was what the show was.
As I was lying in bed that night, I experienced for the first time the feeling of not being able to fall asleep. And I had a tiny little attic bedroom, and I had 2 little windows right above my bed. And I remember staring at the branches through the windows for a really long time. And then my mom came in to check on me, and I told her that I couldn't sleep. And this is what she said to me.
And now this is going to Korea, I hear?
Yes, in
And
April.
So how do you feel about that? What do you think the reaction will be from a
so
Korean audience?
Scared. I'm so scared because I've never been to Korea before.
Okay. You've never been to
Oh,
since-
not with my work.
Oh,
not
okay,
with my
got
work.
it, got it. Okay.
Well, when's the last time you've been to Korea?
College, I think.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's
Do you
been a
speak
really
Korean?
long time. I have like a 2-year-old's vocabulary. So And so I'm going to be performing the show, and they're going to be reading subtitles in Korean, so it'll be, I don't know, I'm really nervous. I feel like Koreans have always liked weird things. All the time I was growing up, Like the movies are so crazy.
Oh, yeah, some of the movies.
The movies are way crazier than anything that's happening in experimental theater. Like it's really like, and I've been looking at some visual art coming out of Korea, and it's amazing. It's amazing.
Right.
Like
It really is.
we're an intense people.
And so in the play We're Gonna Die, you talk about your father's long time battle with cancer, and you mentioned that he passed away last year. How do you think he would have felt now that you're taking this play to Korea, kind of the homeland? What do you think his reaction would have been?
I think he would have been thrilled, because he loved music so much, and to see me with his live band, like singing, I think it would have been, I'm sure that was always kind of like a little dream of his, to be a musician. And so I think he would have been really excited about it.
You've won 2 Obie Awards. Can you explain to the audience a little bit about what an Obie Award is?
An Obie Award is an off-Broadway theater award that's administered by the Village Voice.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yes.
And and they give them out every year, and there's a big ceremony.
Yeah, it's really actually the top award in the off-Broadway world, so it's a pretty remarkable feat. And we're very proud that we have a Korean-American playwright who's received that award. Can you tell us about some other awards that you've been accomplishments that you've had?
The most recent one was a Doris Duke Artist Award from the Doris Duke Foundation, and it's actually a $275,000 grant, which is just absolutely amazing and which has changed my life.
Well, are there any Asian American playwrights that we should be on the lookout for?
Well, I think all of them are known already, like David Henry Wong, obviously,
sure.
like I love him.
Me too.
And
Have you met him before?
oh yeah. He's so wonderful. Like he's somebody I really aspire to be like, because he's so, he's like so well known, but he's so down to earth, and you can talk to him and he hasn't become weird from being famous, and his work is so unpretentious. That's the thing that I love about it. Like it's just so direct and true, and it reflects who he is. And yeah, I think the world of him.
What's next for Youngjin Lee? What are you working on now?
I am working on a play called Straight White Men, and it is a straight white male identity politics show. A lot of straight white men started to realize, we just don't have this, total power we used to, and it's like our power is slipping, and and so it's I'm interested in sort of exploring what that means, and what that experience is like, and yeah.
And now, finally, do you have any words of wisdom for aspiring playwrights out there?
Oh, for aspiring playwrights. I guess my words of wisdom would be to realize that, because I've noticed that so many young artists have this attitude of please pick me. Like they come into the theater world and they just wait to be picked. And they send their plays and they hope and they wait for somebody to say that they're good. And I feel like that is not a good way to approach it. I feel like a better way to approach it is to, instead of looking at all these theaters and institutions as places that you're, like a beggar with your bowl, you should think of it in terms of like these institutions, in order to survive, they need artists more than anything. And they need young up-and-coming artists. And so like what you have to do is you have to realize that, what you have to offer is going to be very valuable to somebody out there, and you just need to find the right people, and this there's this weird idea, I don't know where they get it, that they just submit to everybody and hope one of them picks, but really you have to go out and you have to pick. You have to go find the people where, you really feel like they need you. And then when you go to them, you're not begging, you're offering them something.
It's great. Words of wisdom.
Well, thank you very much for joining us on The Portfolio.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you for having me.
Hang on. It's great talking to you.